I'm Brian McCall, and this is Chris Ferrara, and we're happy to speak to you today in this program sponsored by the Fatima Center. How are you doing this morning, Chris?
I'm fine. Forgive my surroundings here. I'm stuck in a hotel room because I attended the Catholic Identity Conference this weekend. And I spoke yesterday, and the event dragged on into the late afternoon and evening, so I went to visit some good friends in our traditionalist movement and ended up staying here overnight, so here I am in this hotel room. Not my usual venue, but we'll make do.
We'll make do, that's right. Well, and for viewers new to in this show, which we're going to try to release every other week, Chris and I are going to get together and talk about one or two topics from a traditional perspective. So giving kind of a Catholic perspective on what's going on in both the church and the state. So this week we're going to start with the state, the civil authority, and we want to talk about something that's been in the news for a while now. That is the state of Texas has passed a new law that banned all abortions. So it was illegal to perform or procure an abortion after a fetal heartbeat has been detected. They will get into a little more detail in a minute, but one interesting thing of it, instead of having the police come out and arrest abortionists, it essentially said that any citizen, even of Texas or not Texas, another state, would enforce the law by bringing a lawsuit against the abortionist or whoever assisted the abortionist for damages that could be paid. So it leaves the enforcement to private citizens. Most recently, the abortion industry was obviously not happy about this, and they tried to get the law not to go into effect, so they sued. They went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, who decided while the case proceeds, so just temporarily, that they couldn't stop the Texas law. There was not a clear legal rationale to not let it go into force while the case proceeds. So to be clear, they didn't rule that the Texas law was constitutional or permissible. They just allowed Texas to leave the law in force while these challenges go on. So that's a brief summary. Let me start, Chris, asking you, there's been some criticism among some in the pro-life movement of Texas law, even though the reports are there's 85 or more % of abortions have been stopped in Texas, that it's not perfect, that it doesn't do the morally consistent thing and say any abortion from the moment of conception. It just narrows in on this after a fetal heartbeat. So what would be the Catholic perspective on that? Is that an unlawful compromise that they did?
Well, John Paul II's moral theology was always quite sound. Obviously, upheld the moral norm, which condemns abortion as an intrinsic evil, but also recognized that in the legislative arena, you have to make prudential concessions as a legislator, because there's no alternative. As long as you make clear your opposition to abortion, in principle, as an intrinsic evil, that can never be justified. And in fact, you have a duty to mitigate the harm to the common good and the crime of abortion by doing what you can as a legislator, to at least enact a legislation that cuts back on the genocide that is going on against the unborn. And that's what this law is all about. You do what you can within that context. If you did nothing, of course, then abortions would proceed apace, and 85% of abortions would not have been stopped in the state of Texas.
I found it interesting, the critics of the law that attacked it. They would never actually refer to it as the heartbeat or when a heartbeat's detected. They would say, when a so-called heartbeat has been detected. And then when they were pressed, I thought this was great. They said, well, it's not a heartbeat, it's cardiac activity. So you can have cardiac activity without a heart, I guess.
Well, the spirit of our age and what the moderns call the state of liberty is just one big lie. They lie about everything. And they have to redesign the language to accommodate these lies. So a heartbeat is cardiac activity. Now they won't even refer to men and women. A recent article in The Lancet, for example, referred to women as bodies with blank, and I won't name the sexual organ by which they identify these certain types of bodies. But apparently we no longer even refer to men and women as distinct identities and kind. So that's out the window, along with now apparently a reference to heartbeats as heartbeats. The idea is to obscure the obvious, because that's all we do when we defend these norms. Even within the church, we're just masters of the obvious. And it's obvious that a heartbeat is a heartbeat. They can't allow that to be understood by the public. And there's something very compelling about legislation that pegs the prohibition of abortion to a heartbeat. It's very difficult for someone to say that a beating heart should be stopped.
Yes.
The very concept of that is horrific to the average person. So the law is very cleverly designed to work within the framework of Roe versus Wade, this inventive right emanating from penumbras of the 14th Amendment. The legislatures in Texas, the legislators in Texas did what they could within that context. I mean, and we hope that someday Roe versus Wade will be overturned. It's a horrific abuse of power. I think it was Justice White who said it's an abuse of raw abuse of power, condemning the decision. So we hope for that. But in the meantime, we do what we can. We have to do what we can. We can't do nothing. To do nothing is actually to shirk your obligation as a Catholic if you're a legislator.
Well, and to be clear, this law doesn't say, hey, abortion's great up until a heartbeat, go ahead and do it. It just only enacts penalties against abortions performed. And again, usually when we say 8 weeks, that's 8 weeks from the last cycle of the woman. You know, most people don't even know they've conceived or have a child, in them for 4 or 5 weeks. So we're really talking in a very, very narrow window. But what's important is that they're not sanctioning, saying, "Oh, this is great." They're just drawing a line where the consequences will come. And I think even St. Thomas, said the civil law is not as encompassing as the natural or divine law, is not as perfect, and it can never prohibit everything in all circumstances, just because, as you say, the context we find ourselves. And so it's important to see the law in that realm. And we wouldn't want to, save the lives and the ability to be baptized of, hundreds of thousands of children just because we say, well, this isn't perfect. But tell us a little bit about your experience, because you have great experience in litigation and Supreme Court precedent. So what can we read into the fact that the Supreme Court didn't just stop this in its tracks and let the law go into effect? Does that give us some hope, a lot of hope? How would you characterize it?
I think we have a seesaw in the court that hinges on a 5-4 majority. I don't think we're ever going to get Robert on the side of this Texas law or any law that radically cuts back, let alone abolishes the crime of abortion. So we're pivoting on a 5-4 majority. And we're reading tea leaves to try to figure out what they're going to do ultimately if the law comes back before the court after challenges below, because it's going to happen. Once the lawsuits are filed, I don't know if any have been filed yet, then, of course, district judges in the federal courts will very predictably declare the statute unconstitutional and either stay the lawsuit or dismiss any such lawsuits. Then it will come back to the court, and it's going to be 5-4. We just don't know which way it's going to go. And I would hesitate to make any prediction about this. If I had to bet my life right now, I would say probably 5-4 upholding the Texas law.
Well, we could.
Pretty momentous.
It would be. I mean, we should pray that happens. And then before we move on to our second story. I wouldn't bet you. Don't bet your life. We need you. Don't bet your life yet. But again, I think it's more than Texas at stake here. Since the Texas law went into effect, there's states all over, mostly the South and Midwest, not a surprise, that have introduced laws modeled on the Texas law. And so if they uphold Texas law, it will affect certainly much more than Texas. I know of Florida, a few other states that have already started to pass laws that have mirror essentially their technique.
I think it's very, very cleverly devised. Now, the concept here is that of the private attorney general. So what this law does is authorize any private citizen to act as if he were the attorney general and to enforce this statutory provision. I don't know. Is there an attorney's fee provision in the statute? I don't have it in front of me. Does the prevailing party get attorney's fees?
Yeah, as I remember, I think there are circumstances, yes, where the prevailing party will.
Then you have an incentive, even for lawyers who don't necessarily oppose abortion, to take these cases. So it's a very clever contrivance. I just hope it's upheld when it finally gets back to the Supreme Court on the merits, which will obviously come when there are lawsuits filed. There may already have been some filed already, and those lawsuits are decided or dismissed. So let's hope for the best. But Roe versus Wade has to go. Now, here's another frightening thought. We have the 5-4 majority, probably 6-3 in certain cases, if you include Roberts. But what happens if one of the conservatives passes away, God forbid?
Yes.
I'm particularly concerned about Justice Thomas. because he's older, and I don't know what kind of physical condition he's in, but you know, it doesn't seem to me that he's the picture of vigorous health at his age. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but if we lose one of those conservatives during this administration, you know what's going to happen. They're going to appoint an ideologue, and that ideologue will pull support the other way. And then we'll be back in the same situation we were in before, where we're depending on Roberts for the occasional joinder with a conservative majority.
Yes.
This is a critical time. And we have to hold our breath for the next, 3.5 years?
Yes.
Yes. We get a president possibly who will appoint additional judges. And, you know, justices. And I'm disturbed just to think about what could have been if Trump had been reelected. Because he was steadily filling the federal judiciary with reasonable conservatives who actually make decisions based upon rational principles and just application of the law. I've encountered a few myself in my practice. And it's a dramatic difference when you encounter a judge who just wants to consider the case on its merits and do the right thing under the law. Very refreshing. Because before, all you really had to do was to say to yourself, well, which president appointed this judge? And you knew the outcome already. It's very unfortunate that Roberts came out and said there's no such thing as an Obama judge or a Clinton judge. Come on, we all know that there is such a thing.
Yes.
Trump nailed it when he said that. That's why these activist lawyers picked the Ninth Circuit. They knew they'd get a wacky result imposed upon the parties by some ideologue, and that's why the Ninth Circuit was so frequently reversed by the Supreme Court. So this is a political struggle. It isn't just a judicial struggle. And we have to hope and pray that the conservative majority we have, which is very thin right now, survives until the next presidential election.
Well, and you're right. Justice Thomas is the most reliably conservative, the most consistently Catholic judge.
And Alito,
and Alito, yes. But he is also the oldest. So, again, we have no reason to believe he's got some particular health issue, but he's certainly reaching an age where there's a possibility. So, well, with that, let's move on to our second story, which is Pope Francis's and continuing assault on all things traditional. This has certainly been a pontificate where anything traditional tends to be mocked or attacked, often in the magisterium by press conference, where a mic is handed to Pope Francis and he just sort of lets off in every direction. But we had a more formalized attack on tradition this summer, July 16th, when the Motu Proprio Traditionis Custodes was passed, which put severe restrictions on the traditional Latin Mass, the rite of Mass used by priests for millennia. And really an intention announced that it was to be eventually phased out, that it was on a borrowed time until someday when it would be completely eliminated. So we've been now a couple of months past that. What's your kind of looking back 2 months? What do you think's happened? Do you think that this is really as bad as we first thought, or what's your impression now, sort of a little over 2 months after it was enacted?
It's every bit as bad as we thought. It's just that the potential calamity has yet to be unleashed. But I wrote a column about this for the Fatima Center. As soon as Custodes Traditionis came out, and I warned that the real Big Bertha in this document, the can that's going to blow everything smithereens, is the document's consignment of jurisdiction over the traditional orders, the Congregation for Divine Worship and Sacraments, and the Congregations for Societies of Apostolic Life and Consecrated Life. Those two dicasteries have obviously been given orders to conduct a program of demolition. It's going to involve visitation of the traditional orders and their seminaries. And it's going to involve directives from the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Sacraments to tamper with the traditional Mass and try to bring it into conformity with the Novus Ordo Mass. So, for example, lay readers, possibly communion in the hand, certainly the vernacular translations approved by the USCCB and other bishops' conferences, and that's a double-barreled shotgun. And I've talked to traditional priests during this conference here in Pittsburgh, and they're basically saying, as a matter of fact, it's just a matter of time before they come to visit and tell us to revise our worship and our seminary formation, and we'll be destroyed. They're just saying this as a matter of fact.
Wow.
I'm not going to tell you which orders I'm talking about or which priests I spoke to, but the perception is the plans have already been laid. It's just a question of implementation. This Pope is out of his mind. Let's be honest about this. He just said the other day, this is what he said the other day, and I'm reading, to make the church beautiful and welcoming, we need together to look to the future, not to restore the past, which unfortunately is a fad. Restoring the past will kill us. It will kill everyone. That's just lunacy. And this same Pope said not too long ago, do we follow the commandments? Yes, but not as absolutes. So we have someone who occupies the chair of Peter, the Roman pontiff, declaring that the commandment, thou shalt not, negative precepts, which forbid intrinsic evils, are not absolute. This is the Pope. We have never seen anything like this character in 2,000 years of the papacy. And there have been some pretty awful popes.
Wow.
But when you targets the traditional mass for destruction and calls the past a fad, but not what he's doing, that's not a fad?
That's not a fad. Well, you're right about the nonsense, because one of those other lines that he came out recently, you mentioned readings in the vernacular, and he says to not have them in the vernacular, to read them in the original Latin, would be laughing at God. So he's now just said 2,000 years of history. I guess all those priests were laughing at God when they didn't have Francis to tell them to stop doing that. It's just amazing.
The hubris is just staggering. He really thinks that he's in a position where he can treat the church as if it were his personal possession, and that he is the head of a political party, the party boss, who can tell his party apparatchiks what to do, what he would like to see implemented. And then we have a new party, a new makeup, a new church, whatever he wants, he thinks he can do. And that's a terrifying prospect. As we know, as Benedict famously said, the Pope is not an absolute monarch whose thoughts and desires are law. He must not promote his own ideas. Well, with this Pope, we have someone who says the Pope is an absolute monarch, whose thoughts and desires are law, and who can and will promote his own ideas.
Yes.
He's a dictator. And that's not what a Pope is meant to be.
Well, you mentioned dictator. If we learn from history, the two ways of revolutionizing people that dictators of the 20th century used. So they have their secret police, their Gestapos or their Stasi who show up at the door. And he said they're already being unleashed. We know the Carmelite monastery in Fairfield, Pennsylvania has received their visitors. Their knock at the door to investigate that you're not, if you're loyal to the regime. But then secondly, in parallel with that, they run a sort of media campaign to villainize and discredit the enemies of the state, those that the dictator is against. So be it Pravda or the Nazi-controlled propaganda machines that cranked out those 1930s videos or movies, they were the two-pronged approach. So we've already mentioned the visitations have begun and will, I agree with you, probably continue across every traditional or even traditional leaning order. We have the Franciscans, the Immaculata as a blueprint. But now we see the sycophants, the hangers-on are doing the other part of this and trying to attack those who are interested in tradition. So I'm just showing up on the screen here. There was a article by the National Catholic Distorter. I won't even call it reporter. The independent news source. Independent, yes. And they have a story that came out last week. Says, contrary to traditionalist claims, many Catholics are fleeing Latin Mass parishes. So it's... Yeah, again, no real statistics. I mean, you can go through this. No real statistics, just this unverified claim. And there's a handful of kind of disgruntled people. Let's face it, everybody always has problems somewhere, who over the years have left their traditional community, and now they've got their axe to grind. But all these just vague claims are made about, oh, well, traditionalists act like there's so many people there, and there's so many, people going to this, it's so wonderful. Well, that's not true. There's nobody there. Now, is that your impression? I can tell you mine. From,
traditionalist parishes that I frequent, and they tend to be diocesan approved, are all bursting at the seams. And the Pope himself is recognized and is quite disturbed by this phenomenon that the young people are attracted to the traditional liturgy. They are sick and tired of the happy, clappy, priest in a serape, holding a microphone variety of liturgy, which doesn't inspire. It's appalling. They want the real thing, and they represent the future of the church. The Pope cannot abide this. It seems to torment him that young people are leading this Latin Mass movement. And so he's done exactly what you suggest. He's tried to depict these young people as psychologically disturbed. He said this more than once. Dig, he says. If you dig into the psyche of these people, you will find that there's something wrong with them. Well, that's just calumny. And this Pope basically calumniates and tries to ostracize and personally destroy everyone who opposes him. And it's nothing but a string of epithet for the past 7 or 8 years with this Pope. He's constantly condemning anyone who has any kind of attraction to traditional Roman Catholicism. At this point, it should be clear that this Pope just doesn't do Catholicism. He does his own thing, whatever that is, and we're getting to see the contours of it. Apparently, it has something to do with universal vaccination, the theme park for all religions in Abu Dhabi, climate change, and anything that attracts his interest, but not the traditional faith. And again, this is a Pope who says, blithely, that the commandments of God are not absolute. What do you do with this Pope? Well, the young people are just running from what he represents into these traditional chapels. And are there some disgruntled people who don't like what they see in a certain location? Maybe. But it's a handful compared to what I see, which is chapels filled with young people. The only place they're fleeing to is the cry room because they have babies that have to be taken care of.
Yes. Well, and I'll give you an example. What I see is this sort of biased, unfair reporting. So they quote this person, Gibson, who says, "The claims of the traditionalists are not supported by evidence. When you look at the actual numbers of traditionalist parishes, you realize how minuscule a segment of the Catholic population they really represent. The United States boasts the largest number of Tridentine churches." Pause. I don't know what that means. Tridentine churches. 659, according to the Latin Mass Directory at the time of this writing. But this is a nation of 70 million Catholics. That's about 10 venues for every million worshipers. So let's pause here. He's mixing apples and oranges, right? So he's saying there's 659 venues, but 70 million people, right? He's not comparing people to people, right? He doesn't say how many hundreds of thousands or thousands of people are going, just how many venues. And then he's comparing that to people, right? Secondly, notice what he's doing. He's first of all skewing the numbers because he's only reporting those that are so-called approved by the diocesan bishop. So he doesn't even include independent chapels or those the Society of St. Pius X around here, which would bring that number up much, much higher. They're just not even reported on. But then he's reporting on by location approved by bishops. Well, isn't maybe the problem with that the bishops haven't been establishing parishes for enough people, right? That doesn't prove that there's enough, that there's not many people. What you point out is, wait, are these, bursting at the seams, that there should be more places. I remember years ago when I went to the traditional mass down in Dallas that was in an old Carmel. I mean, it was literally, I would say 15 times the capacity of the place. People were out in the parking lot. They had to have a microphone or a speaker out there. Well, that was one venue, but it was just because it was being held down and forced in that small venue. So, again, it proves nothing.
This argument is easily refuted.
Yes.
It's common knowledge. Everyone knows, the Pope knows, the vocations are in the traditional seminaries.
Yes.
There are no vocations in the diocesan seminaries by and large, except perhaps the Arlington Diocese and a couple of other dioceses where there's at least an approach to a traditional formation. But in the style of the traditional seminaries, you have a surplus of vocations. And that's where the priests are coming from. So in the certain Novus Ordo dioceses, you have no vocations, or one vocation, or two vocations. Then the other problem here is the equivocal use of the term "the faithful." Let's talk about what we mean when we say "the faithful." If you're talking about Catholics who uphold all the teachings of the Church, including those on marriage and procreation, who attend Mass every Sunday at least, because that is what the law of the church requires, and who give generously to the church. If you take that number of Catholics and compare them, the traditional constituency to the Novosolo constituency, I would bet that out of 70 million nominal Catholics, the number who meet that definition is roughly equal to the number in the traditional.
Yes.
So maybe it's a 50-50 split at this point.
Absolutely right.
How many Catholics really follow all of the church's teachings today, including the inconvenient ones on contraception and divorce and remarriage? I would say it's about 10%.
Absolutely right. And again, even anecdotally on the ground, the chapels I've been doing, several of them around the country the past year, particularly since the current crisis in civil society, I see the numbers, as you say, booming. I know that several I've been to were up like 50 to 75% from the last time I had visited there. I was recently in Chicago, up booming from the people there before, have all come in the last just year and a half. And frankly, this contradicts their narrative. So if the Pope's saying, Pope Francis, well, there's a serious problem, there's all these people in the church going to these places, we need to do something about it. Well, why would the Pope waste his time on a minuscule number of people that are so small they don't even matter, right?
He knows it's an unstoppable movement unless he tries to stop it. But it's the Rabbi Gamaliel test. If it's from God, you cannot destroy it.
Yes.
And so leave it alone. It will destroy itself if it isn't from God. But he knows that if he leaves it alone, it will continue to grow. Therefore, it is from God.
Yes.
So he's basically combating, at this point, a movement that's inspired by the Holy Ghost. This is the church attempting to heal itself from the damage inflicted upon her over the past 50 to 60 years. He sees this healing process going on. He's literally trying to rip the scab off the wound, reopen the wounds, and reintroduce divisions that were healing. Just like this president of ours, who says he's going to unify the country, and what has he done except tear it apart from the moment he was elected?
Exactly. And there, I think we just leave with that note of hope, right? If this is from God, nothing can destroy it. And therefore, both of these topics. Eventually, abortion will be stopped in this country, that we will return to the natural law, to the divine law, and in the church will be made whole. And I'm inspired by a phrase of Archbishop Vigano in one of his recent videos he released, where he said, it's good when the devil is roaring at you, because it means he isn't biting you. And the devil is certainly roaring. We saw them roaring against the Texas abortion law, all these women's march, although I can't call them women's march, they're really not politically correct. These marches against it, and all of these Vatican sycophants who are behind the dictator Pope with their attack on tradition. So all these attacks are, in a sense, a good sign that you're doing the right thing. So,
well, the devil's an angel, so he's supremely intelligent, but ultimately, as someone has said, he's a cosmic blockhead. Yes. He will overreach, and his plan will fail.
Yes. Yes, it will. So let us pray to Our Lady of Fatima that the consecration of Russia will occur, and Russia will be converted, and the devil will fall. She will crush him, and her triumph of her Immaculate Heart will begin. So thanks for joining us today, Chris. That's our quick analysis on one topic in church and state. And again, join us hopefully every 2 weeks, God willing, when we'll have another chance to chat about stories of the day. So enjoy your last few hours, I guess, there in Pittsburgh, and have a safe trip back home.
Thank you. God bless. Take care.
See you next time.